So, how's about that Father Comstock, huh? What a character he is, huh? Let's talk BioShock Infinite. What a crazy game. And we'll dive into this. So, before we do, spoilers, spoilers, spoilers. If you haven't finished the game, don't even watch this. Don't even try. Alright, so, big topic of discussion the past week and a half or so amongst a lot of the gaming community has been BioShock Infinite. It's been probably one of the better games released in quite some time, and actually feels like a really solid contender already for Game of the Year. I think it's going to be really challenging for any game to even get close to beating what BioShock Infinite has done for the game industry and for storytelling in games in particular. First of all, it's got to be said, BioShock Infinite is a beautiful game. The graphics from just top to bottom in all of the different levels and areas you can explore, just fantastic. The video footage I've captured here doesn't even come close to doing it justice, and this is on ultra level settings on a PC. But just the sheer magnificence of really seeing everything come together, it's indescribable. It's one of those things as a gamer that makes you really cherish the medium, you know? It's very colorful, it's very bright. It's, in a lot of ways, very similar to what Irrational did with BioShock 1, but there's a twist on it in that Columbia is very alive, where Rapture was a dead city. You were effectively exploring the ruins of this golden civilization. The difference with Columbia is that where Rapture was dead and lifeless and in a lot of ways kind of felt like it was being brought back by the splicers and taken over, Columbia is very full of life. As a city, it's just impressive what they've done here in terms of putting lots of not just enemies on screen, but also lots of NPCs that you really actually care about and that look, they participate in life. They dance, they move about the world, they buy hot dogs, sell hot dogs, you can get a shoe shine, and just everything that occurs within the city feels really cohesive. You can see the life. It's like where Rapture, you were kind of trying to relive the golden era and understand through the audio recordings and logs what was going on. Columbia, you get to just be in it. It's there, you can see it, and it's real. Aside from the artistry, though, one of the things you really have to call out with Infinite is the excellent storytelling they've done here. Just the job they've done putting this story together is fantastic. From the very first moments you get into the game and you set foot in Columbia all the way to the massive mind-fucking revelations at the end of the game, everything just feels really interesting. And I think it's the first game where they've done a lot of story reveals in the middle, but the entire game actually feels like a really big sequence of what the fuck. You really don't know what's happening as you go through each of these different pieces of the game until probably about the last hour and a half or so, when things really start to fall into place. You start to understand what Elizabeth is, who she is, and what she's capable of. You really start to understand sort of the civilization that Comstock has built around this utopia that he's built really for himself and for people like him. And you really get to start seeing how the citizens of the city really integrate in. The other thing that was really interesting to me is that much like with the original BioShocks set in Rapture, there's very kind of a parallel that's being drawn to modern day America. So, you know, BioShock 1 talked about objectivism and Randian philosophy, and it was kind of an undertone there. Like you could look at it and kind of ignore it if you chose to, but it really was the underpinning around so much of the mythology of Rapture and what it was. Whereas in Columbia, it's really the core of the game. So much of it is built around the religious zealotry that founds the city, and about the sort of fanaticism around the founders and around Comstock. And it's really interesting because if you think about when this game started development and how long it was actually in development, There are some very clear parallels being drawn to perhaps the Tea Party. Don't know. Maybe. Think about that. But I think the thing that the game does best with that story, much like the original BioShock, is that it shows that any extreme kind of philosophy used for governing or for really as the foundation of a society starts to cause it to unravel. You can't have just that one ideology in excess. It really has to be a more balanced approach. Infinite's a little more heavy-handed in that regard, and I don't know how I feel about that yet. I'm still kind of processing through all of it. I've actually been playing the game again in pieces, both for footage and also just to kind of relive the story. And it's interesting to see just how much of the game is built kind of heavy-handedly. Because really, when you think about it, if you look at the middle section of the game, after having all of the sort of rabid right-wing religious fanaticism that's built into Columbia from the beginning, you start to, through the Vox Populi, understand the other side of it. So there's like this extreme left-wing, you know, let's bring up the poor and fuck everyone else faction, and there's the industrial, religious, heavy right-wing, you know, I got mine, screw all you kind of factions, and they go to war in the end. And what the lesson that kind of comes out is this weird sort of heavy-handed, both sides are pretty bad. And it's interesting to see it handled that way, because BioShock 1, and to a lesser extent 2, which didn't come from Irrational, so its story's a little both of those games kind of handled just one extreme and really explored it more in detail, whereas most of the sort of undercurrent of that middle plot segment of Infinite is built around the clash of these two ideologies. You have the Vox Populi and the Comstock faction sort of going at it head to head, and the revolt that results paints these new characters in an interesting light. But all of this kind of ends up being a weird sort of footnote on the game, because by the time you get to the very end of it, so much of the game gets wrapped up just spectacularly in that last hour and a half of game. There's just so much revelation going on that it starts to kind of take over your mind. Like, you really can't think of in the game any other place where so much data has been dropped on you. One good comparison I saw today actually compared it to the Matrix, the second Matrix movie, where basically you kind of go through the middle, the plot, and it's okay, and you don't really know what's going on necessarily, but you have a sense that there's motion. There's always forward motion in the plot. And then you reach this point where all of a sudden, in the Matrix, it was the architect, if I remember right. You know, you get into the room and he just dumps 45 minutes worth of exposition on top of you in Neo by proxy. Whereas Infinite handles it, I think, better. But it still ends up being kind of the same concept, and it pulls it off well, actually, which surprised the shit out of me. Because as a game narrative, it's kind of hard to deliver a solid game ending with a solid plot ending in that kind of balance. And Infinite, I think, really pulls that off in a way that games just haven't before. So let's talk about the story. First of all, the possibility that Elizabeth was someone, I should say, more closely related to Booker didn't actually occur to me until near the very end. And it's amazing, actually, when you think about how much, having played again through the opening segments of the game, just how much they really tried to hint at that without being heavy-handed. Between the person at the turnstile when you're going into the Hall of Heroes who says, "Oh, Annabelle," you know, her actual name as Booker's child. And it kind of, like, it throws you off at first because the game never really comes back to reference that until the very end. But there's lots of little nuggets like that if you explore the game, you really start to see. So much of the mythology of Comstock you can actually start to see built up at the beginning. You see the references to burning New York. You see a flashback to that future state that will result from Elizabeth being the leader of Columbia. And there's so many little reveals like that just sprinkled into the game that makes it really, like, it's very much like the Would You Kindly from BioShock in that way. Because in the original game, like, it's one of those things you never really notice on the first playthrough. it slips your mind because all of it's integrated so seamlessly with the actual gameplay that you're too busy playing this action shooter to realize that your brain is slowly being infiltrated by all of this. And so when Irrational comes back and visits that and they say, all right, let's take a look at this story, it completely blows you away. Like, your mind gone. No idea it was coming, and it was spectacular for that because I didn't imagine that this game was going to have such a solid reveal like that so close to the end of the game. And they really kept that close to the vest compared to BioShock 1 when you think about it. And I think that might be one of my favorite parts, actually, of the entire Infinite experience, is that the original BioShock was an excellent game, excellent advancement in storytelling in games. But when you look at it, really, what it accomplished was that it kept players engaged through a lackluster back half. Because you have so much story and just so much of this world in the first half that by the time you get to Andrew Ryan and he forces you to club him in the head with that golf club, it's not until that point that the story really kind of plateaus. And it stops there, and then it kind of starts to slide off because the stuff with Fontaine isn't really all that great. And the gameplay at that point is very similar to what you've already done. There's not a lot of new advancements in the gameplay. You know, the hacking minigames get a little more challenging. You get a few more, I think you get a few more plasmids if I remember right. It's been so long since I played the original BioShock. And so that back half kind of ends up being disappointing compared to the rest of the game. Like that first half especially, just because of how much rich story there is to it. But Infinite combats that in a weird way. Like, I never thought that it would work well for them to push so much of the story into that back half of the game. And that's really what they did here, is they pushed the big "would you kindly" reveal until after you've pretty much had that final boss fight, which really, if you look at it, the fight on the hand of Comstock? The Hand of the Prophet, that's the one, the airship. When you have Songbird under your control, like, that fight really is the end of the actual gameplay, but yet there's so much more behind it. And it's all of that big plot reveals. It's all of that stuff that kind of gets thrown at you at the end, and you're looking for more gameplay to it necessarily, but you don't miss it because the story is such a reward that it's it kind of cancels out the lack of gameplay there, other than the basic move Booker here, watch story unfold, move Booker here, oh hey look, Elizabeth did something, now move Booker here, and so on. That kind of permeates that last hour and a half. On that note, we really do need to talk about the gameplay, because I think in retrospect, having thought about it and read a lot about it, I think the only thing I could actually complain about this game is the core gameplay. It's a solid game, it's an awesome shooter, don't get me wrong. Like, certainly this is a minor criticism for this game, because the whole of it is just so spectacular that it's really hard to identify that flaw. But the gameplay stands out kind of like a sore thumb here, and I'll explain a little bit why I feel that way. So the first thing about the gameplay is that it really, for the most part, doesn't move the series in a good direction, I don't think. I like the Shock series, System Shock 2, BioShock 1 and 2. The style of gameplay with, strategic management of resources. Like your health bar and your Eve in BioShock 1 and 2 were renewable resources. You could stock up on Eve hypos, you could stock up on med kits, and you could go into fights with those items on your person, knowing, like, okay, I'm going to have a big boss fight, I just got my ass kicked, I'm going to reload my save, and I'm going to make sure I have the full stock of health kits and Eve hypos so that I can manage through the fight. Right? Infinite takes some of that away, and it takes a lot of the RPG element out as well. I never really felt like the Vigors were particularly gameplay oriented. Like, you could use them, but really what the Vigors served to do was to incapacitate the horde of enemies that were in front of you so that you could gun them down. And I mean, I like shooters. I'm not the biggest fan of FPSs as a genre, and so I really liked BioShock's handling of the intermixing of the plasmid powers with the guns, and I think that Infinite skews a little too hard to the guns. And on that note too, there's actually something that has been discussed a little bit today out there on the internet that I found particularly interesting, which is the point that BioShock Infinite might be a little too violent. Now, hear me out on this one. I'm not a big fan of sounding the alarm anytime there's blood or gore in a game. I love my games. I will not I don't think it's bad or tasteless in that way, but I think that some of the animations and some of the stuff they added to the game kind of takes away from the impact of the gameplay. Like, you have this really clear-cut moral story. Elizabeth recoils in horror the first time she sees you kill anyone. And if you watch her throughout the gameplay, she kind of consistently looks at you in disgust every time you kill someone. Yet, during the game, she'll toss you ammo. Oh my god, Booker, I am so disappointed that you killed that person. Have a shotgun. It doesn't feel like it's the right way for that to unfold. And I don't know that the dismemberment that they added to the engine with this iteration of the game really adds a whole lot. Don't get me wrong, I'm a fan of excess. I like seeing things like that when the game is built for it, but I think that in BioShock, especially with the story they're telling here, the dismemberments, the heads popping off when you use shock jockey on an enemy, some of that stuff starts to feel a little weird at the end. Like, there's these big sprays of blood, and it's cool, it's chaotic, it's hectic, it's a video game, what do you expect, really? But it starts to feel a little excessive, especially given the story that they're telling, because they're telling this really excellent, well-done story with these clear moral boundaries, and this character who follows you around who so clearly defines these moral boundaries. She hates killing. The first time she kills anyone in this game, in fact, the only time you really see her do it actively, she is shocked and offended. She doesn't know what to think. She doesn't know how to handle it. She withdraws at that point, and yet you do this en masse. You kill so many things in this game, and thematically, it doesn't feel fitting to have the excess showers of gore. That feels like an Unreal Tournament or Gears of War kind of thing. Like, let the gore explosions be there. BioShock doesn't necessarily fit that all that well, I think. The other thing that kind of stood out to me is that when you think about the plot pacing in this game, I think it's really good. But it almost feels like, it felt to me a lot like the story was the reward for playing through the shooter segments. And that's true of a lot of first-person shooters. Certainly, BioShock Infinite's not the first game to have a mechanism like that. But it felt weird to me because the gameplay itself is enjoyable. It's a fun game. It's a good action game, don't get me wrong. I really did enjoy it. I don't want to make this sound like it's like I'm harping on the game. But it felt a lot like those segments, those interactions, were more of what you put up with to get to the story. Because I think the story is really the focus of the game. The action sequences and the shootouts and the enemies are really what you do to get there. The other thing I noticed is that on the note of Columbia as a city, it's a lot more alive than Rapture was in BioShock 1 and BioShock 2 as well. But you'll notice that once you actually get your first real gun after you do the whole raffle thing and you have the option to stone the interracial couple, the game kind of starts to pull away some of those NPCs. You have interactions with them in other places like Battleship Bay, but by the time you get past Battleship Bay and you start moving on into the rest of the game, you very rarely interact with any other NPCs other than enemies until the whole Vox Populi uprising occurs, and then the only difference is you have to figure out what color of jacket you don't want to kill. Which is fine, but it takes away some of that cool, that imbued life that you see at the beginning of the game, because Columbia at the beginning is just fantastic. You see so many people, you feel like people actually live here, which you didn't really get so much with Rapture. Rapture was really reliant on it being sort of told through backstory or flashbacks and audio logs, and you don't really get that sense with Columbia past the beginning. Once you've passed that raffle sequence, it all, like, those people start to evaporate, and by the time you reach the midpoint of the game, they're pretty much gone, and it's just enemies and Vox Populi, and then the Vox Populi become enemies, and it's just all enemies again. Although there are some exceptions to that, like Shantytown is a really good example of where that life comes back, and it feels so touching. You see it again, and it's interesting, it's dynamic, and it feels alive again. And then once you get out of Shantytown, it falls off again. And again, I don't want to overstate my disappointment here with that, because it's not a big disappointment in the scheme of things, but it's noticeable. And when you look back on it in retrospect, you kind of feel that absence of people later in the game. Overall, though, if I had to say right now, like what game that is on the release calendar so far this year that would clearly win Game of the Year, I think it's going to be hard to beat BioShock Infinite, to be completely honest. There are a lot of good AAA games coming out this year, and especially with PlayStation 4 being out by the holidays, and I'd assume that the Xbox next-gen platform will be on a similar release cadence. It's hard to see from the games that have been announced currently, like Battlefield 4, Assassin's Creed 4, Watch Dogs, a new Splinter Cell, all of those different games that have been announced. They seem good, don't get me wrong, but it seems like it's going to be really hard to beat BioShock Infinite. I think this is going to be one of those rare games that kind of transcends the medium again, much like the first one actually did as well. It's hard to escape it even as a non-gamer. If you look at it, there's been TV ads for it everywhere. In fact, just watching 2 hours worth of Comedy Central before recording this video, I saw about 7 ads for it. So it's definitely being put out there. I went to Best Buy today. They had a big display for it. So this game is really getting that commercial push. But I think outside of that, as a story, it really does stand on its own, and it stands up against anything that you could put forward from TV, from movies, from music, as a really good example of art in games. And that's kind of a hard thing to say. Right, and without sparking up too much debate, I do feel like BioShock Infinite is one of those key examples that people will use for years to come of games being art. Not that Roger Ebert or anyone who we'd actually have that argument with is really going to care all that much, but it's pretty clear cut that as a game, BioShock Infinite transcends so much of the medium that it resides within. It's a game, but so many of the trappings that make a game a game aren't really there, and it allows you to explore this world and bury yourself in the story without too much interference from the game portion. So if you're casual or you don't want to play the game, or the action game elements, some of the violent stuff I mentioned earlier really gets to you, you could probably just put this on easy and cruise through to enjoy the story. And actually, if you have people who are interested in the story, I'd highly recommend that, because even outside of the action game elements of it, it's an amazing story. I stuttered over that so badly because I just can't find the right words to describe it yet. I just finished the entirety of the experience on Sunday morning, so it's still kind of digesting. There's still pieces of it that are being peeled off and processed by my brain, and just having replayed it a few minutes ago to get footage, it's really clear that there's so much of it to be explored still. That makes me really look forward to the downloadable content for it. I think that this is going to be one game that really has an opportunity to sell downloadable content and to make the future of that look a lot better for the next-gen consoles and for the future of PC as well. Because if any game could benefit from downloadable content, it's going to be this game. There's so much story and so much richness to Columbia that we could just explore all day. And it'd be fun to see them add things like maybe a sandbox mode, or maybe new characters, or existing exposition for things like Elizabeth's past. What about the Songbird? There's so much that we could explore in this world that I don't feel ready to leave it yet. I feel like the downloadable content's really going to add that extra layer. Now, of course, it's up to 2K and Infinite Irrational to really deliver the promise of that. And we'll see how they do with that. I have faith that as long as Irrational is really heavily involved in that development, they're going to knock it out of the park. There's no question that this game can have so much better downloadable content than most contenders in the space. And I really hope to see them do well at that. I mean, as a testament to how much I like this game overall, I went back onto Amazon after finishing the game and purchased the Ultimate Songbird Edition just because I felt it was important to vote with my dollar, and then also I really wanted that Songbird statue. But nonetheless, it's rare that there's a game that so well... No, that's not the right wording. It's rare that there's a game that so easily kind of ties up all of these elements that make a really solid game into a single cohesive piece that you just want to experience it over and over and you find yourself just wanting to talk about it for days on end. And BioShock Infinite really is that experience, without a question. It's probably, narratively speaking, one of the most solid games I've ever played. And I've played a lot of games that try to really build up their lore internally, but nothing has done as well as BioShock Infinite as making this world believable, characterized, and easily enjoyable. But that's all I got for BioShock Infinite for now. Feel free to leave any discussion that you have in the comments. I'll be watching those, and maybe we'll revisit the topic again soon. Also, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel, follow me on Twitter, and like my Facebook page. And stay tuned. Tomorrow afternoon, or Thursday rather, sorry, we'll be uploading Azerothian Attributes, which is going to be my WoW news for the week. So stay tuned, and don't forget to subscribe.